consciousness deepens, the lab volunteers reported meeting beings as though they had gone into some sort of strange parallel universe, and they started to meet beings of the kind that we do not see in everyday life. Typically, they would be part animal and part human in appearance, and typically they would seem to want to communicate with the volunteers, to have something to say to them. And what David Lewis Williams realized and has absolutely demonstrated, and his theory is now pretty much accepted by the mainstream. Oddly enough, this is one of the few times in my career where I find myself agreeing with the mainstream, is that the art of the painted cave was an art of vision, that our ancestors had perhaps stumbled across hallucinogenic plants, perhaps mushrooms like the liberty cap, Psilocybe semilanciata, which has grown in Europe since the beginning of time, and that they had first consumed these plants as food items, but then they had discovered their extraordinary mental effects, that they experienced these visions, that creatures and beings that were not present in their real physical world were nevertheless appeared in front of them, and that they attempted to reproduce this experience by going into the cave. In many cases, the atmosphere of the cave is very similar to the atmosphere of an altered state of consciousness, and painting on the walls the patterns, the geometrical patterns, the dots, the zigzag lines, and also the strange beings that they saw and encountered and interacted with in these altered states of consciousness. And this, for the first time, explains why all over the world, it doesn't matter whether it's Europe in the Upper Paleolithic, whether it's South Africa in the Middle Stone Age, whether it's Australia, whether it's the Americas, it doesn't matter where it is, the cave and rock art all shows these same features, beings that are part animal, part human, supernatural beings, in other words, and these amazing patterns that keep cropping up again and again in different countries and cultures that were totally unconnected to each other. So the explanation that's given for this is that all of this work was done by shamans who had entered altered states of consciousness, probably by using plant hallucinogens, and that after they returned to normal consciousness, they sought to memorialize what they had seen on the walls of the cave. And because human neurology is the same all around the world, naturally enough, people see all the same things. But for me, this explanation really just doesn't go nearly far enough. It does provide an explanation for the cave art, but unfortunately, most of the researchers who've worked in this field have never taken hallucinogens themselves and have never, ever experienced an altered state of consciousness, so they can't understand how powerful and how convincing these experiences are, and they will just never consider the possibility that I do explore at length in Supernatural,
yes,
which is that actually these experiences are real. They are real experiences, but in a sense not understood yet by Western science, and that to access these experiences, we must adjust our state of consciousness.
Now, we're going to talk a little later about the degree to which we must adjust our state of consciousness. However, you refer in your book extensively to the research of Dr. Rick Strassman, who's been on this program right after he published DMT, the spirit molecule, because I believe, and I think I'm quite correct in this, that human civilization did not begin until we began to come into contact with a parallel universe, and that these drugs are the means, or one of the means, by which we come into contact with it. So why don't you expand on your own studies in this direction a little bit more, if you will?
Well, that's absolutely right. Rick Strassman's work is really of fundamental importance in this field, and I do report it at some length in Supernatural. His work is so important. He was the first scientist in America for more than 20 years to be allowed to conduct direct research with hallucinogens in human volunteers and to get them to report their experiences. And he used DMT, dimethyltryptamine. And what really stunned him was that all his volunteers seemed to be going to the same places and coming back reporting encounters and experiences with the same quote-unquote supernatural beings. And he began to realize that this astonishing universality could not be explained by the notion that there was some kind of brain module for experiencing part animal, part human creatures. The best possible explanation for it were that these encounters were actually real, and Rick speculated that this may have something to do with the notion of parallel universes that is already fully accepted by quantum physicists. But maybe the answer, maybe the way to get into a parallel universe is not through building sort of multi-billion-dollar gigantic scientific instruments like the Large Hadron Collider in Switzerland, but actually the answer already lies inside our own heads. That what we need to do is to adjust the receiver wavelength of our brains. But normally we are tuned, very much 100% tuned into this physical world. We must be in order to function in this competitive world. But that it is possible to retune the receiver wavelength of the brain to pick up other realities, and that these realities may be of fundamental importance to us. And certainly the link in cave art between evidence that our ancestors were exploring altered states of consciousness and an amazing, fantastic leap forward in the human story is very clear, and suggests that these encounters were indeed fundamental in making us human.
Really remarkable. Really extraordinary. The new book, Supernatural, Graham Hancock. Get it in any bookstore. Get it from theunknowncountry.com bookstore and give us a little boost. His website, grahamhancock.com, not to be missed. This is important stuff because it is about the confluence between our world and other worlds that is the basis of human civilization, because it is where we picked up the idea that there was something more to us than that which we lived by, or have lived by for most of our created existence. For 150, more like 165,000 years, we lived in a kind of dream world. And I say a dream world because it was in many ways a more real world than this one is, in the sense that we had absolutely no idea that there was anything like time, that there was anything that we couldn't see in front of our faces, or that anything really changed, and probably had only a very limited idea even of what death was. But then suddenly we began to walk. Something happened. Something happened, and not just in Southern Europe, but all around the world. It's one thing to say that people began to eat mushrooms in Southern Europe, perhaps because of a climate change. They were hungry, and they began to eat what they could, and this remarkable change took place. But it's bigger than that, isn't it, Graham?
Oh, it's much bigger than that. This is all around the world. It's amazing how that you go back to that horizon of 35,000 years ago, and within 10,000 years of that, all around the world, this revolution in human behavior has taken place. And I think the word got around. Once it was understood that these amazing experiences could be unleashed by consuming certain plants, our ancestors started to look actively for those plants. And of course, plants that are capable of unleashing these experiences are indeed found all around the world, and are still used by hunter-gatherer cultures, by shamanic cultures, such as the Indians of the Amazon rainforest, who make use of an amazing combination of two plants to produce what's called the ayahuasca brew, the vine of soul, that puts them in direct contact with the other world and the supernatural beings who inhabit it.
So but it's dependent. Now, you have actually done this, and this is another remarkable thing about Supernatural. It's not only a journey to various places in the world, it's an inner journey as well, because he duplicated, folks, the actual journey that must have been taken by the people doing the cave art thousands upon thousands of years ago. Graham, tell me, what exactly was it like? What did you do? Oh, well, we've come up on a break, Graham. Excuse me. We'll be right back, and when we get back, we'll obviously be talking about one of the most fascinating journeys you have ever heard. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We're back talking with Graham Hancock. He's going to be at the CPAC conference October the 10th through the 15th at the UC Irvine in California. But he's also doing a tour. He's going to be in quite a number of different places. And I believe, Graham, that this tour, that they can find out about this tour on grahamhancock.com, can't they?
Yeah, it's on my website, grahamhancock.com. There's a page called Supernatural, and there's another page called Talks and Events, and both of them contain listings of my upcoming U.S. tour.
Well, he's going to be at the Learning Annex in San Diego on October the 11th. He's going to be at the Learning Annex in Los Angeles October the 17th. And Ann and I are Graham Hancock groupies. You will see us around if you go to any of these things. We'll certainly be at the CPAC conference, hopefully at the Learning Annex in L.A., because I think I am talking to one of the most important thinkers, intellectuals, and adventurers in the world today. Now, let's get back to this question of actually taking these drugs. You did this. What was it like?
I did, and I did it because I feel that I cannot present an authentic study to my readers unless I directly experience the thing that I'm talking about. And the hypothesis, the suggestion is that our ancestors made their great leap forward to become fully human as a result not of the alert, problem-solving consciousness that is favored in our society today, but of deeply altered states of consciousness that our society dismisses as hallucination. And it seemed to me bizarre that we should, on the one hand, accept that something supposedly so trivial as experiencing hallucinations could have transformed human behavior and given us our greatest leap forward in 6 million years. And yet not examine what hallucinations actually are, because most of the academics working in this field simply have a prejudice about these things called hallucinations and don't have any direct experience of them themselves. So I decided I had to experience that, and I wanted to do it in the way that shamans do. And so for that reason, I chose certain plants that are used in shamanic cultures all around the world. One of them was ibogaine. It comes from Central Africa. It was originally used by the Pygmies, and it's now passed on into other peoples in Central Africa. It's a root bark, and when you take it, you get very, very ill, and then you start to experience visions and encounters, very often with deceased ancestors and with intelligent beings that are not of this world. I went to the Amazon, to Peru, to drink ayahuasca with shamans there. Ayahuasca means the vine of soul, and it means so for a very good reason, because again, it offers this contact with another realm. If one wants to prepare oneself for death, there is no better preparation than the ayahuasca experience, which leads us on into another world that exists beyond this physical world. Of course, I took psilocybin mushrooms, which are almost certainly the agent that energized the consciousness of our ancestors in Upper Paleolithic Europe. And I took DMT, the substance that was used in Rick Strassman's studies, and a number of other substances as well. I wanted to experience these things before judging what hallucinations are. I wanted to experience them and then come to my conclusion. And the conclusion that I've come to cut a long story short, is that we're dealing with a really profound mystery here, and that hallucinations are another kind of perception. They are not fantasies that are just cooked up in the brain. They are another form of perception of another kind of reality, and this is why these astonishing universals occur, and why it's even possible for people to meet each other in the other world, which is what shamans do all the time. One simply must master the techniques, and what's needed above all else is experience, and I decided to expose myself to that kind of experience. And although it was terrifying at times and extremely upsetting, because it just stripped away all my preconceptions about the nature of reality. It was fundamentally a nourishing and important series of experiences that have changed utterly the way I look at the world.
Now, let's talk a little bit about those experiences.
And also the strange beings that they saw and encountered and interacted with in these altered states of consciousness. And this, for the first time, explains why all over the world, it doesn't matter whether it's Europe in the Upper Paleolithic, whether it's South Africa in the Middle Stone Age, whether it's Australia, whether it's the creatures and beings that were not present in their real physical world were nevertheless appeared in front of them, and that they attempted to reproduce this experience by going into the cave. In many cases, the atmosphere of the cave is very similar to the atmosphere of an altered state of consciousness. And painting on the walls, the patterns, the geometrical patterns, the dots, the zigzag lines. What David Lewis Williams realized and has absolutely demonstrated, and his theory is now pretty much accepted by the mainstream. Oddly enough, this is one of the few times in my career where I find myself agreeing with the mainstream, is that the art of the painted cave was an art of vision, that our ancestors had perhaps stumbled across hallucinousness deepens. The lab volunteers reported meeting beings as though they had gone into some sort of strange parallel universe, and they started to meet beings of the kind that we do not see in everyday life. Typically, they would be part animal and part human in appearance, and typically they would seem to want to communicate with the volunteers, to have something to say to them. Hallucinogenic plants, perhaps mushrooms like the liberty cat, Psilocybe semilanceata, which has grown in Europe since the beginning of time, and that they had first consumed these plants as food items, but then they had discovered their extraordinary mental effects, that they experienced these visions